wife Liz, she's Portuguese, right? So hence why I kind of got into the Portuguese wine stuff. But
I was like, we need to get into that. We will.
yeah, we will.
Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me. I first was introduced to you, or heard about you rather, through Roy Hirsch, of
Roy,
course.
yeah.
I feel like Roy is just, if you're into port wine, he's kind of like the godfather of port
Yeah.
wine. Like he's
Yes.
just, everybody knows him.
Mhm.
He's sampled more than 15,000 bottles of port wine in his life, and counting. I think probably he added like 10,000 more this
Yeah,
year.
probably think you'll laugh. Yeah.
But he recommended, he said, you should really reach out to Matt. He does this
Yeah.
incredible Tawny Tuesday live stream, all that. And we will get into that. But first, the icebreaker. If you could invite one guest, living or dead, to a dinner party, who would you choose?
So the funny thing is that my cop out answer, only because I've been asked this question 1,000 times before. Funny story. I'm related to Abraham Lincoln.
No way.
Yeah. We're like a third cousin of Abraham Lincoln. My dad's mom's maiden name was Lincoln, right? So when I've been asked this question before, my answer is always, "Oh, Abraham Lincoln," right? It's a quick, it's an easy answer, and I really would like to understand kind of, like, we think we live with a lot of stress. Like, my job is stressful and my kids are stressful. Well, you had a whole country that was falling apart, so you
Mhm.
know, so that has always been my answer. That probably is my answer. Um, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I mean, seeing how this is like a wine thing, right? And I kind of feel like my answer should be um, something with wine. Um, I I was lucky enough to have dinner with Roy when we went to Portugal 2 years ago. We met Roy for dinner, um, and I would like to go to dinner with Roy again. You know what I mean? He's I don't know. Like, I get kind of starstruck when it comes to a lot of these. Like, I joke, like, my kids make fun of me, but literally, like, when I see like a winemaker, or like a winemaker responds to like one of my posts, I'm like, it's like you're meeting Joe Montana, right?
Yep.
Or I guess, Tom Brady or something like that. Um, and I don't know, I kind of get that way with the wine, and I feel like, you know Roy doesn't know me, or didn't know me from Adam, and I would respond to some of his posts, um and I always felt like he was gracious enough to respond to me. I used to call him Mr. Hirsch, and he's like, no, 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 whatever. And so I was lucky enough to meet him for dinner, and like I said, and I think, as you said, um he's such a wealth of information.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's many Americans that are that knowledgeable about Portuguese wine. And I love Portuguese wine for many reasons, not just the port. I love all Portuguese wines. But the knowledge that he has, and the stories that he has, and the understanding and the background, and the ability, like, he mentions, you know the Nieports and the Van Zellers, and like on first name bases and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And it's just, I think there's, and he's so down to earth. I would like to have dinner with Roy one more time. You know what I mean? I really would, just because his stories are great, and he's so patient, and he doesn't force his opinion on you. And if you say something, as I do many times on Tawny Tuesday, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I make many many mistakes, many pronunciation mistakes, and he's so gracious in the way that he steers me and kind of guides me. Yeah. I mean, he's great. So it'd probably be, if it was a wine figure, it would be Roy. If it was anybody else, I'll say Abraham.
Two very different figures, but I love
Yes,
it.
absolutely.
Yeah, Roy could deliver a masterclass in port wine,
Yeah,
and
as
his
I think he
passion.
has.
Yes,
Yeah,
and his
yeah,
passion for it is just palpable. You can
yeah.
just definitely
Yep.
tell. But now I want to know your background: structural engineer by day, port enthusiast by night.
No, no, yeah.
But tell us
I feel like I need
how.
the cape,
Yeah.
the cape and the hat, Enderman. Yeah.
How did you get interested in port wine? Because there aren't a lot of us Americans who are interested in port wine. It seems.
So the first time I had, so this will go all the way back to my senior year at Virginia Tech. So funny how everything comes full circle.
Yeah.
I was always a very serious student, so I always took a lot of I could have graduated like a semester early because I had taken all my credits and stuff like that. So my final semester, I took like one engineering class. I took golf
Nice.
because who doesn't want to play free golf? And I took there's wine tasting class. So as I mean, you may or may not know, Virginia actually does have some of the oldest vineyards in America, and there is it's not Napa, but there is a big viticultural scene which has only grown since I've been at college. But anyway, but so the professor there that they had a wine tasting class, so actually you learned actually it's called wines and vines. It wasn't quite wine tasting. Um, but I learned a tremendous amount and I really enjoyed it. Right. So, I was 21 at the time. I graduated. And then I was like, you know what? I want Wine Spectator, right? So my parents got me a Wine Spectator subscription, like whatever, for my birthday or something like that. And I kind of got into wine, but as like all newbies, and especially if you follow certain, um, publications, and I'll leave it at that. They focus on like the key ones. There's always Napa. There's always like Italy. There's always Bordeaux, right? Forget about it.
Right.
Um, and like that stuff to me just always, I always kind of wanted to try some of these like glorious wines, but they're always, $200, 400 dollars, whatever. I can never do it, but every once in a while you'd see this great port that they would review, and I was like, oh, dude, I could, $50, $40. Oh, I can afford that, right? So, um, but I knew nothing about it, right? And like, they say, oh, don't drink for 20 years. And I was like, whatever, I'll drink it, right? So that's how I kind of first kind of got into the port. Um, but I didn't enjoy it all that much, right? Um,
Interesting.
so I had a couple bottles. Like I use a certain app to track all my stuff, but I've used this app for like 20 years, right? So I can
What's
go
the
back
name
and
of
I
the
can
app?
see Seller Tracker. I've literally used Seller Tracker probably going all the way back to like maybe like 2005, 2006. So I can literally go back to like 20 years of my cellar. And I can go back to and I can see kind of like what I wrote about, the early ports and stuff. And you know, oh, it kind of tastes this, it kind of tastes this, but I never kind of enjoyed it. Anyway, so um, now fast forward to when Liz and I started dating, and so she's Portuguese, and so there's always like Portuguese wine and stuff at dinner tables, and the weird thing was I actually when we first started dating I did not like Portuguese wines. I didn't. And I was like, oh, how could you guys drink this stuff? It's I want like the Napa Cabs, right? I want that type of stuff, and um, but her family would bring like a 20 to the table, or occasionally a ruby. Usually it's 20s, right? So what I've learned is the Portuguese drink generally the wood age stuff, all the 20s, right? And it's so when you're out with Portuguese people, generally they just drink the 20s and the colheitas and stuff, and it's really the English, right, that drink the rubies and the vintage ports and the LBVs and stuff like that. And so I enjoyed the 20s. I didn't like them too much. But I remembered liking some of the ruby styles. So in order to kind of like maybe fit in a little bit, I was like, oh, I'm going to start drinking more rubies. At least it's a Portuguese thing, and I can kind of,
Mhm.
be more part of the family and stuff like that. So I think that's, how I kind of got into the rubies. And at this time, I'd been drinking wine for, 10, 15, maybe 15 years, right? So I knew a lot more. My palate understood. I wouldn't say it's refined, but I could taste different things. So um, so I started to enjoy it a lot more. So I guess that's kind of how I got into just the general port category, right?
And interesting. And is it something that, like, if you hadn't met your wife, do you think you would have even gone so far
Probably not.
down?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
probably. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, probably not at all, right? Because
Yeah.
as I mentioned, like when Liz and I first started dating, I didn't. We go to the Portuguese restaurant. So I don't know how you know about Fall River, right? I'm sure from
Yeah.
being in New England, right? So there's a
Yeah.
huge community down here in Newark, New Jersey, which is basically just like Fall River. Huge Portuguese community, Portuguese restaurants everywhere, Portuguese wine shops, Portuguese, bakeries and supermarkets and stuff. So we go over her parents, for lunch or dinner, or we go out to a restaurant. I said, man, I had a very difficult time kind of appreciating the Portuguese wine. So probably had we not, started dating and eventually got married, I probably would have still been drinking California stuff or Bordeaux or Italy was my sweet spot, right? So I liked Italian wine a lot. So So yeah, I would say probably not. I probably would have maybe dabbled in it a little bit as I had
Hmm.
done earlier, but I would not be as gung ho about it as I am now.
Interesting. Yeah, my husband is not a wine drinker. He's just starting to get into wines like Napa Cabs.
Okay,
But he drank port when we were dating. Like we would
good.
go out to dinner, and he would be the one to initiate it. I didn't even like this was before Starboard and everything, and I
Yeah,
was like, huh, that's interesting. Like I used to drink that in the summertime at dinner parties anyway.
yeah. Oh,
So
that's cool.
yeah, so tell us about Tawny Tuesday. This is something that I personally enjoy seeing when I do have the time
Good,
to catch it. I find it deeply informative. It is
good.
only a live series on Instagram, right? It's not on YouTube or
Yeah, I don't.
okay.
Yeah, I'm
So
not. I was never into the whole social media thing. I guess
yeah.
I'm just whatever old school or whatever. But I don't have a YouTube account. I don't have a Facebook account. I don't have a Twitter account. I don't have a TikTok account or any of that stuff. And for the longest time, um, I didn't have an Instagram account, and my wife does, and whatever. I mean, like the funny stories at night where one couple's they're lying in bed and one's on the phone and one's on the other phone. So Liz be on Instagram and I'd be on like Google News or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then literally one day I was like, let me just see. So I created an account, and I just kind of wanted to see kind of what was out there. And obviously, we were already married at this point. I was already kind of into the Portuguese wine and stuff like that. So like I don't even remember. I just started like scrolling, right? And like I searched for whatever. I don't even remember what it was. And I just started scrolling and I like this guy's post and I friended him and I like this guy's post. And so so after I mean, so I was like, maybe I'll start like my own like wine thing, right? And that's what it is, right? So and then I taste wine and I post my thoughts about it, and and then after a while I was like, like everybody's doing this. I don't want to be famous, but like how could more people kind of get interested in
Mhm.
stuff? And then I am not clever. I'm not good at marketing, right? I don't think so anyway. But but like Tawny Tuesday popped up, right? And I was like, oh, that's kind of funky. Tawny Tuesday. It's like Taco Tuesday, and it's got like a little ring to it. And to be honest with you, I was trying to come up with something else besides Tawny Tuesday because I didn't really enjoy Tawny's at that point. I mean, like I said,
Could have
I
been
would.
Ruby Tuesday,
I, well, that's so. There's a funny story there.
yeah.
So my one good friend that was here, also Portuguese, he's from the Dow region, but he lives here, Carlos. Um, After I was doing this for a while, and I was like, dude, a while, like maybe 2 or 3 months. And I was like, oh my god, I wish I could do rubies. I'm getting so tired of tawnies. And he's like, Ruby Tuesday, dude. Don't you know the Rolling Stones? And again, like, see, I'm not clever, right? And so, like, literally, I was like, dude, you're a genius. So we actually have done Tawny Tuesday goes Ruby Tuesday. Like, we've done some things like that where we've done LBVs or just Ruby Reserve or something like that. Um, but the funny thing is, so that's why I did it, just because you don't. I didn't see a lot of posts. Like maybe Roy was one of the very few people that always posted about port, right? A lot of the people that I follow, they have a post about port, but as do I. A lot of their stuff is other Portuguese wines and stuff. So I was like, oh, maybe this is a little like untapped, area, a little niche thing. I can kind of do it myself. It's got that alliteration, and it'll be fun. I'll learn, right? People will learn from my mistakes. I'm not shy to make mistakes or anything like that. So that's kind of how it started.
So how has it been perceived when people see the content, view it? Are they
Yeah.
excited? I mean, yeah, how have you grown this
Yeah, I
community?
mean, they love it. I mean, I have there's not a lot of them, but I do have a pretty, a pretty regular following, you know what I mean? And, like I said, it's not a lot, but there's about, 15 or so, maybe 20, but they don't always join, but there's about like 15 or 20 people. And most of them are in Portugal, right? Again, it's the difficulty I have, as you mentioned before, is kind of how do you bring it to like the American market? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like it's um but there's a lot of people that, and Roy is one of them, that literally is a religious, like day week in and week out will chime in, and there's a lot of people, a lot of, they're my friends now at this point, obviously, right? Just like you said, you're friends with these people, friends with Roy and stuff like that. So, we're all friends now, but they'll message me, hey, I didn't see a story. You have, because sometimes I post earlier, hey, this is what we're going to be tasting, right? And then, and I do that just so in case people want to buy it and then taste along with me. And then, even if you don't want to go live with me, you can comment and, you know, it's kind of like drinking with a friend or something, but just like learning more about it. You know what I mean? So, but they'll be like, hey, I didn't see anything. You have one this week, or what are you drinking this week? Or so, yeah, I think for the people that tune in,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a following to it. It's just like I said, the people that tune in are either already port fans
Mhm.
or they live in Portugal, so they're at least drinking port on an occasional basis, right? So I
Mhm.
kind of would like to, as you kind of reach the American population that doesn't drink it very often. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
So,
yeah,
what does that look like then, in your opinion? And this is an interesting question because when you think of a port wine for Americans, like the best entry point, I know Symington family, I asked them this through School of Port, and they said Reserve Ruby. And then I
mhm,
asked Roy this, who obviously, who leads a wine tourism business and
mhm,
introduces plenty of Americans to port wine.
mhm,
He had said an LBV,
yeah,
late bottle vintage.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
I'm curious what you think would appeal most to the American palate.
They bottle vintage, yeah. So my take is this. And I may get shot for saying this, but anything reserve, ruby reserve, tawny reserve, whatever, there is certainly a place and a time for them. Um, but I've outside of a single ruby reserve, Val di Maria, I don't know that I've had one where it made me say, dude, I want to come back for a second glass. I
Interesting.
don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the lack of bottle age. I don't know all the decisions that get made in the barrel room. So how do you, and year in and year out, if you're declaring this a vintage year, then how do you say, hey, um, these 10 barrels are going to my vintage, and then these five are going to, like, is it like, I don't know how they make that decision, but
Hmm.
like I said, I've never had a reserve 20 or a ruby reserve where I said, dude, got to have that, right? And for me, at least around where I live, you can get LBVs for $20 a bottle, and a Ruby Reserve is going to be maybe 15, maybe 12, right? I mean, and the 20s are kind of the similar, right? A Reserve
Hmm.
20 is going to be in that 15, 18 range, and a 10-year is going to be, you know, 25 or something like that. So in my book, for an extra $5, the quality is just so much greater, and it's just like I said. So I think that's the sweet spot. I don't think Tawny's, as it wasn't for me, is a great place to start the American palate, because the American palate doesn't kind of, never been exposed to all that woodiness and that nuttiness and that caramel and stuff like that, right? That you get in the Tawny's, right? It's just, but they have
Hmm.
had, like your husband has, rich, fruity, over the top Napa cabs, right? And so an
Hmm.
LBV is basically just that on the sweet side, right? So
Right.
I think that's kind of the place to start. You know what I mean? That would be a
Yeah.
good entry point.
Interesting because I always thought, and I had this conversation with Roy, that Tawny's would be a good place to start for Americans only because of, like, you think about the Kentucky bourbons and the Tennessee
Mhm.
whiskeys and the
So
kind of
that's a good point.
barrel aged. Like, I do
Yes.
think, there is, that kind of, we do have that palate, that caramel
Hmm.
nuttiness, like that you do get from a tawny. So that's where my mind
That's
was going.
interesting.
Yeah.
See, I didn't put that. See, I'm thinking strictly wine drinkers. How are we
Yeah.
getting wine drinkers to now drink port? But
Sure.
see, that's why you're more
Yeah.
clever than I am. You're
Yeah.
thinking even broader, right? So how do we get the whiskey and the bourbon drinkers to stop drinking that and to drink wine,
Right.
or to at least, yeah, try it? So I never even considered that. That's a great point.
But I would say, to your point, though, I completely agree that wine drinkers and bourbon drinkers, I would argue, are very different,
Oh
in
yeah,
the sense, different groups of people. I think you can absolutely find folks who enjoy both, but for the majority of it, I think that
yeah,
wine is just such a different animal.
mhm,
And it is so complex and nuanced, and in
yeah,
port in and of itself, you add the fortification process to it, and
yes.
you're just like,
Huh, yeah,
it's in a league all its own. Um,
I agree.
yeah. So you say you're not clever, but how do you, in a perfect world, how would you envision introducing more Americans, and getting more Americans on board to drink port?
I think there needs to be more media. I mean,
Yep.
it's just that's the simple answer, right? I mean, the way anything gets popular in America these days anyway is it on YouTube or is it on TikTok or something like that, right? And so I think there needs to be almost like an over the top kind of media blitz or something, but I don't think there is anybody or a team of anybody's that can can actually do that. You know what I mean? It's funny,
Hmm.
like, you and I, we probably follow all the same port houses and, like you said, School of Port and all this other stuff. And every single one, when they have an event in the Netherlands, when they have an event in London, and there's a lot, right? Forget the ones in Portugal. It's easy for them to do stuff in Portugal. When they
Right.
travel to like the Londons or the Netherlands and stuff like that,